I shall never be your wife. That sentence is written in a young woman's hand, in ink that has not faded in 169 years. It sits among nearly 200 letters found in the desk and the lodging rooms of a man who was already dead when the police opened them. The handwriting is difficult. The letters cross and recross the page, written sideways over lines already filled. Because paper was expensive and the writer had more to say than a single sheet could hold. Some of these letters are love letters. Some are confessions. Some contain passages so explicit that when they were read aloud in an Edinburgh courtroom in July of 1857, grown men in the public gallery turned their faces away, and newspaper editors across Britain debated whether the content could be printed at all. The writer was Madeleine Hamilton Smith, aged 21. The eldest daughter of one of the most prominent architects in Glasgow. The dead man was Emile L'Angelier, aged 33, a packing clerk earning 10 shillings a week, born in the parish of St. Helier on the island of Jersey, and buried in a pauper's section of Glasgow's Ramshorn Cemetery on Ingram Street because he had no family in Scotland and no one with means to claim him. He died on the 23rd of March 1857. His stomach contained enough arsenic to kill 40 men. His landlady found the letters, and the trial that followed became the most sensational criminal case Scotland had ever produced, not because of the arsenic, not because of the verdict, but because of what those letters revealed about a young woman of privilege and the man she had promised to marry, the man she had given herself to, and the man she may have murdered with a cup of cocoa. Madeleine Smith walked free on a verdict that exists nowhere else in the world. Not guilty, not innocent, something between. A word that Scotland keeps for cases where the truth is visible, but the proof is not proven. The verdict translates, in the wry tradition of Scottish legal commentary, to something like this: "We know you did it. We cannot prove it. Go, and do not come back." Madeleine Smith never came back. She left Scotland, changed her name, married twice, emigrated to America, and died in New York in 1928 at the age of 93 under the name Lena Wardle Sheehy. She is buried in Mount Hope Cemetery in Hastings on Hudson. Emile L'Angelier is still in Glasgow. His tombstone in the Ramshorn kirkyard is almost illegible. The name is vanishing from the stone, the way it vanished from every conversation Madeleine Smith ever had after the day she was acquitted. But the letters survived. And the letters are the story. If you are here for the first time, if you followed the title into a Glasgow that smells of coal smoke and arsenic and the particular silence of a courtroom where a young woman sits perfectly composed while her most intimate words are read aloud to strangers, then you have found the right channel. This is soil of crime. We do not rush, we do not simplify, and we do not look away. Subscribe. The soil has more to show. To understand the letters, you have to understand the man who kept them. And to understand Emile L'Angelier, you have to begin not in Glasgow, but on a small island in the English Channel, 40 miles from the coast of Normandy, where a boy was born into a family that gave him a name far grander than his prospects. Emile L'Angelier was born on the 30th of April 1823 in St. Helier, Jersey. His father, Pierre-Francois L'Angelier, was a seedsman, a dealer in garden supplies, with a small business and a large family. His mother, Victoire Mélanie Lacroix, was French. The name L'Angelier carried a Huguenot resonance that suggested, to those who did not look closely, a lineage of gentility and continental refinement. The reality was more modest. Emile grew up speaking French at home and English in the streets. He worked in his father's nursery. He learned the properties of soil, the behavior of plants, and the uses of arsenic as a pesticide, a detail that would take on a grotesque significance decades before anyone knew it mattered. He was handsome by the standards of mid-century portraiture. He had dark hair and a careful manner of dress that suggested ambitions beyond his income. He was vain. He was, by the testimony of people who knew him, a man who believed himself irresistible to women and destined for a station in life that his birth had not provided. In the 1841 census, Emile, aged 15, was recorded living with his parents and siblings in St. Helier. It was a modest household, respectable but not prosperous, the kind of family that produced sons who stayed on the island and tended the nursery, or sons who left and tried to become something else. Emile chose to leave. In 1851, at the age of 28, Emile crossed the water and arrived in Scotland. He was looking for a life that Jersey could not give him. He did not find it immediately. When he first arrived, he was destitute. He slept in charitable lodgings. He depended on the kindness of innkeepers, eating meals he could not pay for, wearing clothes that were growing threadbare, walking the streets of a city that did not know him and had no reason to care. Edinburgh first, perhaps, and then Glasgow. The timeline of his early years in Scotland is hazy, reconstructed from fragments of testimony and the later accounts of acquaintances who remembered him as a man of ambition and insufficient means. Eventually, he found work, a clerkship at a warehouse at 10 Bothwell Street in Glasgow. The pay was 10 shillings a week. He also worked periodically as an apprentice gardener, which was closer to his father's trade but further from the life he imagined for himself. He moved through a series of cheap lodging houses in the merchant quarter of the city. He cultivated his accent, his dress, his manner. He presented himself as something more than he was, a French gentleman of reduced circumstances rather than a Jersey nurseryman's son looking for a way up. He had previous romantic attachments. He had previously tried to improve his position by pursuing women of higher station. He had been disappointed. He had been cast down, according to trial testimony, by suicidal despondency. His health was not strong. He suffered from stomach complaints that preceded his acquaintance with Madeleine Smith by years. And in the spring of 1855, through a mutual friend named Miss Perry, he found the way up he had been looking for. Her name was Madeleine. Glasgow in the 1850s was a city of extraordinary and violent contrasts. The merchant class had built itself a monument on Blitheswood Hill, a grid of Georgian terraces rising west of Buchanan Street, with Blitheswood Square at its summit. The houses were designed by John Brash, built in the 1820s for William Harley's magnificent new town of Blitheswood, and they were magnificent. 4 stories of dressed sandstone with tall windows and columned porticos. The terraces formed a square around a private garden, locked with iron gates, accessible only to residents. The families who lived there were architects, merchants, manufacturers, the professional aristocracy of a city that was building ships and locomotives for the British Empire and exporting them to every continent on earth. Below the hill, in the wynds and closes of the old city, typhus and cholera moved through tenements where families of 12 shared a single room. The distance between Blitheswood Square and the Gallowgate was less than a mile. The distance in lived experience was the breadth of the century itself. The Smith family lived at number 7 Blitheswood Square, on the corner of Blitheswood Street. James Smith was one of Glasgow's most successful architects. His wife, Elizabeth, was the daughter of David Hamilton, the city's leading neo-classical architect. They had 5 children. Madeleine was the eldest. She had been educated at Alice Gorton's Academy for Young Ladies in London, where she had learned French, piano, elocution, embroidery, and the precise choreography of a young woman's entrance into polite society. She returned to Glasgow at 18, accomplished, beautiful by the standards of her time, and profoundly bored. Boredom is not a detail, it is the engine of everything that follows. Madeleine Smith had been taught to walk correctly, to speak correctly, to sit in drawing rooms and attend concerts and promenade along Sauchiehall Street in the company of her mother. She had been taught to wait for a suitable man to present himself, to accept his proposal with gratitude, to manage his household, to produce his children, and to never, under any circumstance, express a desire that had not first been approved by her parents. She had not been taught what to do with a mind that wanted more than this. She met Emile through a mutual acquaintance, a Miss Perry, who was herself friendly with L'Angelier. The meeting was almost certainly engineered. Emile had been looking for an introduction to a family of standing. He was 32. He was well-dressed, well-spoken, older, worldly, French in manner, if not precisely in origin, and he was, in a way that no eligible man in Madeleine's sanctioned social world could afford to be, dangerous. The Smiths forbade the relationship immediately. James Smith assessed L'Angelier's financial prospects and social standing and concluded correctly that the man was unsuitable. L'Angelier earned 10 shillings a week. He had no property. He had no family connections in Scotland. He was, in the language of the Victorian class system, beneath them. Madeleine did not stop. She could not stop. And this is the part of the story where you must decide what you are watching. Because from this moment forward, everything depends on whether you believe Madeleine Smith was a victim or a predator, and the evidence supports both readings with equal force. She wrote to him. He wrote back. The letters multiplied. She wrote up to 20 letters a day, not all to Emile, but a staggering number of them, sometimes mailing 2 or 3 in a single envelope, crossing and recrossing the pages until the handwriting became a dense net of ink that required patience to decode. She visited the post office in George Square to send and collect letters, sometimes multiple times in a day. The letters were delivered within hours. The post office was the Victorian internet, and Madeleine Smith was its most prolific user. The two met in secret. At night. At her bedroom window in the basement of 7 Blithswood Square, where the iron railing of the area gave just enough space for a man to lean against the glass and speak in whispers to the woman inside. Later they met at the Smith family's country house, Rowelin, near Helensburgh on the Clyde. Emile walked the 8 miles from Bridge of Allen to reach her. In the rain, in the dark, through countryside he barely knew. Let me be clear about the geography. 8 miles on foot in the 1850s on roads that were not lit and not always paved is not a casual visit. It is a declaration. Emile L'Angelier walked through the Scottish night to reach a woman who was already promised to him, or so he believed, and who was, in the most explicit terms she could find, telling him in writing exactly what she wanted him to do when he arrived. The letters are the heart of this case, and the reason it has never been forgotten. Victorian women of Madeleine Smith's class were not supposed to have desire. They were not supposed to express it. They were certainly not supposed to write it down and send it through the Royal Mail to a 10-shilling-a-week clerk in a Glasgow warehouse. Madeleine did all of these things, and Emile kept every letter. He kept them because he loved her, and he kept them because he was not stupid. He understood, with the instinct of a man who had clawed his way from a Jersey nursery to a Glasgow counting-house, that those letters were worth more than anything Madeleine's father could ever pay him. They were insurance. They were leverage. They were power. And that is what makes Emile L'Angelier one of the most complicated victims in the history of British crime. He was a man who used love letters as a weapon. He was also a man who walked 8 miles in the rain to hold a woman's hand through a basement window. Both of these things are true. Neither one cancels the other. In January of 1857, Madeleine's parents found a suitable match. His name was William Harper Minnock. He was a prosperous Glasgow businessman, a neighbour of the Smiths, exactly the kind of man James Smith had been waiting for. Minnock proposed. Madeleine accepted. Whether she loved him, whether she even liked him, whether the acceptance was relief or surrender, is impossible to know. But she knew what had to happen next. The letters had to come back. On the 10th of February 1857, Madeleine wrote to Emile and asked him to return every letter she had ever sent him. She was gentle. She was formal. She appealed to his honour as a gentleman. "I know you will never injure the character of one you so fondly loved," she wrote. "No, Emily, I know you have honour and are a gentleman. What has passed you will not mention." Emile's response was not gentle. He refused. He told her he intended to show the letters to her father. He told her he would expose the affair, the meetings, the intimacy, everything the letters contained. He told her, according to friends in whom he confided, that he would not allow Madeleine Smith to marry another man as long as he himself lived. That sentence. Read it again. He would not allow her to marry another man as long as he himself lived. On the 21st of February 1857, Madeleine Smith walked into the shop of John Curry, a druggist on Sauchiehall Street in Glasgow. She was 21 years old. She was the daughter of one of the city's most prominent architects. She was wearing clothes that announced, to anyone who cared to look, that she was a woman of means and respectability. She asked to purchase arsenic. The druggist asked what it was for. She said it was for killing rats. Under Scottish law, the sale of arsenic was regulated by the Arsenic Act of 1851. Every retail purchase had to be recorded in a poison book with the buyer's name, address, the quantity purchased, and the stated purpose. The buyer had to sign. And the arsenic itself had to be mixed with a colouring agent, soot or indigo, to prevent it from being confused with sugar, flour, or any other white household powder. This was a law designed to make arsenic poisoning difficult. It was not designed for a woman who signed the register with her real name and walked out in broad daylight. She signed, M. H. Smith, 7 Blithswood Square. For rats. The arsenic she bought was not white. It was stained, as the law required, with soot that turned it a dull grey. This detail will matter. It will matter more than almost anything else in the trial. It will be the crack through which Madeleine Smith walked to freedom. Between February and March of 1857, Madeleine purchased arsenic on 3 separate occasions from 3 different chemists. Each time she signed the poison book. Each time she used her real name. Each time she said it was for rats. The first purchase was on the 21st of February from Curry on Sauchiehall Street. The second was on the 6th of March from a druggist named Murdoch. The third was on the 18th of March, 5 days before Emile L'Angelier died. The total quantity purchased was substantial. The quantities were recorded, the signatures were verified. If Madeleine Smith intended to poison a man and escape detection, she did not behave like someone who understood what detection meant.
If you are watching this, you already know how a true crime story ends. So here is something almost no one knows: how 10 of these cases changed the law itself, the real reason the rules you trust today exist. This is only for the brave souls and the true crime seekers, the ones who do not just want the verdict, but what the ground kept after the courtroom buried it. We built something for you. 10 true cases, 40 archival engravings, 200 pages, told in the plain voice of a 19th century crime journal. No invention, no shock for its own sake. One question runs under every chapter, and once you read it, you will never look at a verdict the same way again. The door is here. Most will scroll past it. You will not. Go grab it before the launch price ends. Thank me later.
Or she understood perfectly and did not care, because the coloured arsenic she signed for was not the arsenic that killed Emile L'Angelier. I want to stop here and ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Not in the comments, in your own mind. If you were Madeleine Smith, and a man who held 200 letters containing the most intimate details of your life was threatening to destroy your family, your reputation, and your future, and if you lived in a world where a woman's reputation was the only currency she possessed, what would you do? Hold that question. We are not done. Where are you tonight? What city, what country, what room? Tell me in the comments, because this story crosses oceans before it is over. The arsenic she bought was not white. Under Scottish law, retail arsenic had to be mixed with a colouring agent, soot or indigo, to prevent accidental ingestion. The arsenic Madeleine signed for was stained. This detail will matter. Between February and March of 1857, Madeleine purchased arsenic on 3 separate occasions. Each time she signed the poison book. Each time she used her real name. The first purchase was on the 21st of February, the second was on the 6th of March, the third was on the 18th of March. After the first purchase, Emile L'Angelier fell violently ill. He suffered stomach cramps, vomiting, diarrhea. He recovered. He told friends and colleagues that he feared Madeleine was trying to poison him. He told them this repeatedly. After a while, they stopped paying attention. He continued to visit her. He continued to drink the cocoa she prepared for him, passing the cup through the basement window of 7 Blithswood Square. A cup of chocolate handed through iron railings in the dark by a woman he knew, or should have known, was trying to kill him. This is the detail that makes Emile L'Angelier a tragic figure rather than merely a foolish one. He named his killer. He named her repeatedly. He was right. And nobody listened. And he went back to her anyway. On the evening of the 22nd of March 1857, L'Angelier returned unexpectedly to Glasgow from Bridge of Allen, where he had been on holiday. He told his landlady, a Mrs. Jenkins, that he had been called back to the city on a business matter and would need a front door key because he would not return until late. The business matter was a letter from Madeleine asking him to meet her. He went out. He did not return until past midnight. At approximately 2:30 in the morning of the 23rd of March, Mrs. Jenkins was awoken by a violent commotion at the front door. She found Emile L'Angelier on the doorstep, doubled over, retching, barely able to stand. Other lodgers helped him to his room and into his bed. By 7 in the morning, a doctor was called. He administered laudanum and water. It did nothing. Emile L'Angelier died on the morning of the 23rd of March 1857. He was 33 years old. He was alone. He had no family in Glasgow. He had no savings. He had a desk full of letters from a woman who had promised to marry him and then signed the poison book 3 times in 4 weeks. A love letter from Madeleine, signed with her pet name Mimi, was found in his clothing. In the days that followed, the police discovered the rest. Nearly 200 letters, some in his lodging house, some in his desk at work, all in the same crossed and recrossed handwriting, all bearing witness to an affair that had begun in desire and ended in arsenic. The post-mortem found 82 grains of arsenic in L'Angelier's stomach. At least half an ounce remained in his body, even after a full night of violent illness. No one in the history of British toxicology had ever documented that quantity of arsenic in a murder victim. It was a dose sufficient for 40 men. It was enough, the pathologist said, to kill the entire household. But here is the detail that saved Madeleine Smith. The arsenic in Emile's stomach was white, pure white. Unstained, the arsenic Madeleine had purchased at the chemist's was coloured, stained with soot or indigo as the law required. Dr. Penny, professor of chemistry at the Andersonian Institute, was called to testify. He had conducted experiments feeding coloured arsenic to dogs. The colouring agent was always detectable in the stomach and organs. The arsenic inside Emile L'Angelier did not match the arsenic Madeleine Smith had signed for. The prosecution could not explain this. The defence did not have to. Madeleine was arrested on the 31st of March. Her trial began on the 30th of June 1857 at the High Court of Justiciary in Edinburgh. It lasted 9 days. The prosecution, led by the Lord Advocate James Moncrieff, presented the letters, the arsenic purchases, the motive, and the pattern of illness that followed each of Madeleine's meetings with L'Angelier. The circumstantial case was overwhelming. The defence, led by John Inglis, the future Lord Glencorse, dismantled it with surgical precision and 3 arguments that, taken together, created enough doubt to save Madeleine Smith's life. First, no witness could place Madeleine and Emile together on the night of the 22nd of March. No one saw them meet. No one saw her hand him a cup. No one saw anything. The prosecution had a pattern, 3 purchases of arsenic, 3 episodes of illness, each following a meeting between the accused and the victim. But a pattern is not proof. And on the night that mattered most, the night L'Angelier died, the prosecution could not place the 2 of them in the same room, on the same street, or even in the same quarter of the city. After the trial, the Scotsman ran a small article reporting that a witness had come forward claiming to have seen a young man and a young woman outside 7 Blitheswood Square on the night of L'Angelier's death. The witness had not been identified in time. The trial was already in progress. Had this testimony been heard, the entire case might have turned on it. But it was not heard, and the absence of that single eyewitness was the crack through which Madeleine Smith walked free. Second, L'Angelier himself was known to consume arsenic recreationally. This was not as outlandish as it sounds to a modern ear. In the 1850s, arsenic was available without restriction for cosmetic use. Women used it as a complexion powder. Men used it as a tonic, believing it improved vigor and stamina. L'Angelier, familiar with arsenic from his years in his father's nursery, was known to use it in small quantities for his stomach complaints. His valet testified that L'Angelier had, on at least one occasion, spoken of ending his own life. The defence did not need to prove that L'Angelier had killed himself. It only needed to introduce the possibility. And the possibility, once raised, was impossible to dismiss entirely. Third, and most devastatingly for the prosecution, L'Angelier's diary was excluded from evidence. Inglis fought for this exclusion, and won. The diary was a small, private journal in which L'Angelier had recorded his daily activities with the casualness of a man who did not expect his entries to be read by anyone. The entries noting his meetings with Miss Smith and his subsequent episodes of violent illness were almost offhand, buried among references to other friends, other visits, other ordinary days. But the cumulative pattern in those pages, meeting illness, meeting death, would have been devastating. The jury never saw it. Had they seen it, modern legal scholars broadly agree, the verdict would almost certainly have been different. What the jury did see were the letters. All of them. Read aloud by the clerk of the court on the 5th day of the trial, the 4th of July, 1857, in a reading that consumed nearly the entire session. The defense objected. Inglis argued that only the letters directly relevant to the charges should be admitted. The judge overruled him. The prosecution wanted every letter heard. And so the clerk of the court stood in the well of the High Court of Justiciary and read, in his own voice, the words of a 21-year-old woman to the man she had loved and the man she may have killed. The public gallery listened in a silence that was not silence at all. It was the sound of an entire society reckoning with the fact that a young woman of privilege had written, in her own hand, things that Victorian propriety insisted women were incapable of feeling. The letters moved from tender to passionate to explicit with a directness that left no room for euphemism. Newspaper editors across Britain debated whether the content could be printed. Many decided it could not. The letters were described in the press as too warm for reproduction, a phrase that told readers exactly what they contained, while technically withholding it. Madeleine sat in the dock throughout. Her composure was extraordinary. She did not weep, she did not flinch, she did not lower her eyes. Observers noted this with a mixture of admiration and horror. A woman facing a capital charge, hearing her most intimate words read to a room full of strangers and showing no emotion at all. Some called it courage. Some called it evidence of a conscience that did not exist. The letters did not convict her, but they destroyed her. On the 9th of July, the jury delivered its verdict. On the first charge, administering poison with intent to kill in February, not guilty. On the second and third charges, the same acts in March, not proven. The crowd outside the court cheered. Madeleine Smith, who had sat through 9 days of testimony with a composure that struck observers as either courage or pathology, was free. But the verdict was not acquittal. Not proven is not innocent. It is a door left permanently ajar. It says, you are not convicted, but you are not cleared. Live with that. She lived with it for 71 years. After the trial, the Smith family was ruined. Not financially. Socially, the name was unsalvageable. James Smith, the architect who had built his career on the respect of Glasgow's professional class, left the city. The family moved to Bridge of Allan, then to Old Polmont. James Smith died in 1863, at the age of 55. Every account of his final years uses the same word. Broken, Madeleine reinvented herself. She moved to London, adopted the name Lena Smith, and in 1861 married George Wardle, an artist and draftsman who would become the business manager of William Morris's decorative arts firm, Morris, Marshall, Faulkner and Company. The marriage placed her in the centre of London's pre-Raphaelite artistic circles among people who valued beauty and craft and who were, by temperament and conviction, inclined to judge human behaviour by standards more complex than the ones that had nearly hanged her in Edinburgh. She had 2 children, Mary, called Kitten, born in 1863, Thomas, born in 1864. She contributed designs to the firm, work influenced by the pre-Raphaelite movement's celebration of handcraft and organic form. She became involved with the Fabian Society, the intellectual engine of British socialism, and was an enthusiastic organizer at its meetings. She made the coffee. She numbered among her acquaintances the young George Bernard Shaw, who presumably did not know, or chose not to mention, that the woman pouring his coffee had once been the most notorious murder defendant in Scottish history. Because she was known as Mrs. Wardle, not everyone knew who she was, but a few did. There were whispers. There are always whispers when a woman reinvents herself as thoroughly as Madeleine Smith reinvented herself. The whispers followed her, but never quite caught her. She had learned, perhaps, the art of staying just ahead of her own name. She also started the fashion of using mats on the dinner table instead of a tablecloth. This detail appears in multiple biographies. It is a strange thing to be remembered for, alongside the other thing she is remembered for. The marriage dissolved in 1889. Madeleine was 54. The reasons for the separation are not recorded. She crossed the Atlantic and arrived in New York, where she subtracted years from her age on the immigration forms, a practice she maintained for the rest of her life, and began calling herself Lena. Her son Tom was already in America. She joined him. Around 1916, at the age of 75, though she claimed to be 36 years younger, she married a 49-year-old man named William A. Sheehy. By 1920, the census placed her on 8th Avenue in Manhattan, living comfortably, her identity undiscovered, her past an ocean away. William Sheehy died in 1926. 2 years later, on the 12th of April 1928, Madeleine followed him. Her death certificate states that she was 65 years old. She was 93. Even in death she was revising the record. She was buried in Mount Hope Cemetery in Hastings on Hudson, New York, under the name Lena Wardle Sheehy. No mention of Glasgow, no mention of Blitheswood Square, no mention of the letters or the arsenic or the young man from Jersey who died with her pet name in his pocket. Her own attorney, John Inglis, who had saved her life with one of the finest defences in Scottish legal history, privately considered her guilty. So did Henry James. So did George Eliot, so did Jane Carlyle, so did virtually every legal scholar who has examined the case in the 169 years since the verdict was read. Emile L'Angelier never left Glasgow. His grave in the Ramshorn Kirkyard on Ingram Street is still there. The tombstone is weathered beyond easy reading. The name is eroding. The churchyard sits between the modern buildings of the merchant city, surrounded by restaurants and bars and the noise of a Glasgow that has rebuilt itself so many times that the 1850s feel like another planet. But the basement window at 7 Blitheswood Square is still there. The house stands at the crown of the hill on the corner of Blitheswood Street, a 4-story Georgian terrace that has been vacant for years. In 2017, it was sold for £2,450,000. The listing described it as reputedly haunted. Plans were submitted to convert it into a boutique hotel. The design statement noted, with the careful understatement of commercial property development, that a murder had taken place in the basement flat. The iron railing around the basement area, where Emile L'Angelier stood in the dark and spoke through the window to the woman he loved, is still there, and the letters are in the Mitchell Library in Glasgow. 13 of the originals, preserved under glass. The ink has not faded. The handwriting still crosses and recrosses the page. The words are still there. Can this truly be coincidence that the weapon Emile used to threaten Madeleine, the letters he kept and refused to return, were the same evidence that led the police to his body and the poison book to his killer? He held those letters over her head like a blade, and when the blade fell, it was his own grave it opened. Emile L'Angelier was not a saint. He was vain. He was manipulative. He used a young woman's most intimate confessions as leverage to force her into a marriage she no longer wanted. He was described at trial as a profligate, vain adventurer, conceited, pretentious, inflated with an idea of his own attractions. He was all of these things. He was also a man who walked 8 miles through the Scottish night to hold a woman's hand through a basement window. He was a man who left his family on a small island in the English Channel and crossed the sea with nothing. He was a man who died alone at 33 in a lodging house, with no family to claim him, buried in someone else's vault because no one with means knew him well enough to pay for a grave. He deserved better than this story. He deserved better than a tombstone that is vanishing and a name that exists only as a footnote to the woman who may have killed him. He deserved better than the word that defines him in every encyclopedia entry and every true crime anthology. Victim, as if that is all a man can be, when the woman accused of killing him is more interesting than he ever was. The Ramshorn Kirkyard on Ingram Street in Glasgow is a small walled burial ground behind the former Ramshorn Church, now part of the University of Strathclyde. The gravestones lean at angles, the inscriptions are fading, moss covers the names of merchants and ministers and their wives, people who mattered in the Glasgow of the 1850s and who matter to no one now. The vault where Emile L'Angelier was laid is marked, but the lettering is nearly gone. Tourists come looking for it. They bring guidebooks and walking tour pamphlets. They take photographs of the stone and then walk up the hill to Blitheswood Square, where the basement window is still visible at number 7, the window through which a woman passed a cup of cocoa to the man she was killing. Pierre-Emile L'Angelier, born the 30th of April 1823, St. Helier, Jersey, died the 23rd of March 1857, Glasgow, Scotland, packing clerk. Nurseryman's son. Lover, blackmailer, victim, his last act on earth was to walk back to his lodging house, alone in agony, and hammer on the door until someone let him in. He died before morning. The letters are still in the library. The grave is still in the kirkyard. The basement window is still on the hill. And Madeleine Smith lived to be 93, under a name no one recognized, in a country that did not know what she had done. Not proven. Not guilty. Not innocent. Not answered.